fabled heat, where magic meets desire. Subscribe to ignite the fantasy.
You look a little stressed. Are you flying from home or flying to it? I looked at the middle-aged man beside me, twisted in his seat with a wedding ring glinting under the harsh cabin lights. He had the distinct air of someone expecting me to be his spoken-word entertainment for the entire flight to Ohio. I would have paid a hefty surcharge if a "no assholes beside me" pass existed. My skin felt too tight, a symptom of the hunger that always simmered beneath the surface, prickling like static electricity against the cheap fabric of the seat. The recycled air tasted stale, and the low drone of the engines was a grating hum against my heightened senses. "I'm just going to look out the window for a bit," I mumbled, turning away. It was a classic Lillian avoidance strategy, a defense mechanism I'd honed long before my biology decided to rewrite itself into something predatory. Fortunately, he took the hint, leaving me to stare at the endless sea of clouds and mentally workshop how I was going to handle my parents. My hometown. I'd hooked up with an airline stewardess in an airport bathroom an hour before boarding, a frantic, desperate encounter just in case there was a mix-up at my hometown's SIA branch. The hunger was a bottomless pit, especially when anxiety was shoveling coal into its furnace. A fretful thought surfaced. What if I try for a hookup at a local bar and someone remembers me? I was a loser in high school, wasn't I? The plane touched down with a jolt that rattled my teeth. I had plans, backup plans, and alternatives ready to go. But the variable I hadn't accounted for, the one that made my heart hammer against my ribs, was the reception committee waiting just beyond the jet bridge. Not my parents, not yet. Ezra stood like a cliff face against the tide of disembarking passengers, tall and broad in a way that his tailored suit struggled to contain. His eyes were the color of slate, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass. Beside him was Silas, a creature of deceptive ease. Where Ezra was stone, Silas was water, fluid, leaning against a pillar with a lazy grin, his amber eyes tracking every movement until they locked onto me. My SIA handlers, my protectors, my complication. "Consultant," Ezra greeted with a nod, his voice a low rumble that vibrated pleasantly in my chest. "You guys didn't have to wait right at the gate," I hissed, adjusting my carry-on. "You look like you're about to arrest me." "We prefer the term aggressively chaperone," Silas teased, falling in a step beside me. His arm brushed mine, and the contact sent a jolt of pure heat through my jacket that had nothing to do with the stuffy terminal. Besides, Section 8 protocols. "Value asset in a non-secure zone. We don't let you out of our sight, Lil. My parents are picking me up at baggage claim," I whispered frantically. "What are you supposed to be, my coworkers, colleagues?" Ezra stated, his gaze constantly scanning the perimeter. "We're here for a software engineering conference. We happen to be on a similar flight schedule." "Conference on what?" Menacing glares and tactical fashion. Silas chuckled, his voice like warm honey. "I know what a python is." "It's a coding language, Silas, not a snake." "See, I'm learning." We reached the baggage claim, and all my practiced bravery evaporated when I saw Mom waving from her car just outside the sliding glass doors. Panic clawed at me. "Don't cry, don't panic." "Showtime," Silas whispered, his hand ghosting over the small of my back. It was meant to be steadying, but it just made my body hyper-aware of how long it had been since I'd felt a touch that wasn't purely transactional. I ran over and hugged her. She seemed a little older, but she still smelled like home. "It's good to see you," Mom said, wiping a tear. "Your sister should arrive in a few minutes." I introduced them. "Mom, this is Ezra and Silas. They work with me in Chicago." Ezra shook her hand with polite, terrifying intensity. "Mrs. P, it's a pleasure. Lillian speaks highly of you." "Oh, aren't you too handsome?" Mom beamed. "You look like you play football." "Typing builds heavy wrists, ma'am," Silas lied smoothly. When Anne finally arrived, dropping her bags to hug me, I spun her around, desperate for a moment of normalcy. But as we packed the car, the reality set in. I was a demon sitting on a secret that could shatter this family. And I had two incredibly dangerous, incredibly attractive men shadowing my every move, watching me with a hunger that mirrored my own. "You okay?" Ezra murmured as I closed the trunk, his body shielding me from the wind. "No," I admitted, my voice small. "I feel like a grenade with the pin pulled." "We won't let you explode," he promised. But as I looked at the darkening sky and felt the familiar, hollow ache in my stomach, I wasn't sure he could keep that promise. The car ride home was an exercise in claustrophobia. Anne and I were squeezed into Mom's sedan, while Ezra and Silas followed in a sleek black rental that screamed government budget. I watched them in the side mirror, two silent silhouettes that made me feel safer and more endangered all at once. The familiar streets of my hometown slipped by, each landmark a ghost of a life I no longer lived. The old movie theater, the corner store, the park where I'd had my first kiss. Everything was the same, but I was irrevocably different. "So," Anne said, poking my ribs with a grin, "the colleagues, are we talking spreadsheets or bedsheets?" Anne, Mom scolded from the front seat, though her eyes darted to the rearview mirror with undisguised interest. They are strictly professional, I lied, though the memory of Silas's scent, cedar and rain, was clinging to my senses like a second skin. They're just protective, work friends. Aha, Anne smirked. She knew, of course. She knew about the demon thing, and she likely guessed that the two supermodels tailing us weren't here to debug code. We arrived home, and the domesticity of it hit me like a physical blow. The smell of pot roast and cinnamon, the old creaky floorboard by the door, Dad's collection of fishing rods in the corner. It was a life I had disqualified myself from the moment my wings sprouted. Ezra and Silas helped carry luggage inside with a lethal efficiency that made Dad raise an eyebrow. "You boys staying for dinner?" Dad asked, sizing Ezra up. Dad was a big guy, but Ezra was a monolith of muscle and stoicism. "We wouldn't want to intrude," Ezra said, his voice polite but firm. "Nonsense," Mom waved a hand. "Lillian's friends are our friends, there's plenty." I caught Silas's eye. He gave a microscopic shrug. His gaze was clear, saying what his voice couldn't. Protocol, stay close to the asset. Dinner preparation was a blur of forced small talk. I offered to help, but found myself hovering uselessly in the kitchen, hyper-aware of the space. Ezra stood by the patio door, looking out at the backyard as if scanning for snipers in the hydrangeas. Silas leaned against the counter, charming Mom with stories about Chicago traffic, his voice a low, easy cadence. I walked past him to grab a glass of water, and his hand shot out, catching my wrist. His grip was warm, instantly grounding. "Your heart rate is 120, he murmured, his voice pitched so only I could hear. "You need to breathe, Lil." "I can't," I whispered back, my throat tight. "I'm lying to them with every breath, and I trailed off, unable to say the word, hungry. The airport snack hadn't been nearly enough. The stress was burning through my reserves, leaving a cold, gnawing void in my center that demanded warmth, friction, life. Silas's pupils dilated. He could smell it on me, the pheromones of a starving succubus. "Hold on," he said softly, his thumb tracing a soothing line over my pulse point. "Just get through dinner." "Lil, honey, you're white as a sheet." Mom's voice cut through the fog. "Are you okay?" Soon we were seated. The food was hot, the room was cozy, and I felt like I was dying. Anne was practically giddy, the traitor, waiting for the show to begin. Ezra was seated to my right, Silas to my left, a wall of muscle and magic boxing me in. "So," I began, my voice trembling slightly, "you all love me, right?" Unconditionally. Ezra's knee pressed against mine under the table. A solid, unyielding weight, a silent message. "We're here." "Is this like that time you asked if you were adopted?" Dad asked, frowning. "Sort of," I said, pushing my chair back and standing up. "Can you promise not to freak out?" I took a deep breath as my magic slammed the blinds shut, plunging the room into shadow. Then with shaking hands, I reached for the hem of my shirt. "That's some very revealing lingerie she's wearing, dear," Dad remarked to Mom, suspicion radiating off him. Ezra shifted, his gaze dark and protective. Silas leaned forward, his amber eyes locked on my face, offering silent encouragement. "Okay, okay, okay," I whispered to myself. I closed my eyes and let the glamour fall. The sensation was always a relief, like taking off a corset that was 3 sizes too small. I felt the familiar weight settle on my brow as my horns curled up from my forehead, dark and sharp. My tail unspooled from the base of my spine, a nervous, whip-like appendage that twitched in the suddenly cramped space. And my wings, leathery, sensitive, and massive, tore through the magical veil, unfurling to their full, room-filling span. The tips of them brushed against the china cabinet behind my chair, making the little glass figurines inside rattle. "I'm a demon," I blurted out into the suffocating silence that followed. I opened one eye. Mom and Dad were staring, their mouths hanging open, forks suspended halfway to their faces. Anne just took a slow, deliberate sip of her water. The technical term is succubus, I guess." I rushed on, the words tumbling out like water from a broken dam. "I need sustenance. To survive, in the form of life energy, which I get through physical intimacy, basically every day." I felt Silas's hand find mine under the table again. This time he didn't just squeeze, he interlaced our fingers, his thumb rubbing soothing circles over my knuckles. It was an anchor in the storm of my parents' shock. "I haven't killed anyone, though," I added quickly. "So I didn't get arrested and paraded on the news, and the SIA, the Supernatural Intelligence Agency, they know. Say it's okay, and I'm working with them as a consultant." I gestured vaguely to the 2 men beside me. "That's what Ezra and Silas are. They aren't just colleagues, they're SIA, they handle me." "Handle you," Dad repeated, his voice faint as he stared at my tail. Ezra cleared his throat, the sound authoritative, drawing every eye. "We ensure Lillian's safety, sir, and we help her manage her unique biological requirements. She is a signatory with high-level clearance, vital to national security." "Vital," Mom echoed, her gaze snapping back to me. The shock was breaking, replaced by a mother's inquisition. "What's this about needing sex constantly?" The interrogation was excruciating. We talked about numbers, logistics, health, and safety. At least a couple thousand partners if you count random acts, I admitted, shrinking into my chair as my wings drooped. You what? Both parents bellowed in unison. We vet all potential partners, Ezra interjected smoothly, lying through his teeth to save me. Lillian's health is strictly monitored. We take every precaution. And you, Dad pointed his fork at Silas. Are you one of these vetted partners? Silas didn't flinch. His grip on my hand tightened, a silent promise. We do what is necessary to keep Lillian stable and operational. Our relationship is multifaceted. It was the most diplomatic way of saying we haven't slept together yet due to regulations, but we both want to devour her that I had ever heard. The dinner continued, a surreal mix of horror and dawning acceptance. Mom asked about STDs, Dad asked about binding contracts, Anne laughed until she nearly choked on her potatoes. By the time dishes were done and Mom had cornered me in my childhood bedroom for the emotional heart-to-heart, I was utterly drained. The stress of the confession had burned through what little energy I had left. You're so brave, she whispered, hugging me tightly after I'd explained everything. But you're still my little girl. Promise you'll call me, no matter what. I promise, I sobbed into her shoulder. She left the room, closing the door softly. I collapsed onto the bed, my wings aching, my body trembling with a cold that blankets couldn't fix. I was safe with my family, yes, but physically, I was starving. A soft knock came at the door. It opened before I could answer. Ezra and Silas slipped inside, the click of the lock echoing in the quiet room. The room felt instantly smaller, charged with a sudden, potent energy. Ezra leaned back against the door, crossing his massive arms as if guarding the entrance. Silas prowled toward the bed, his movements predatory and graceful, his amber eyes glowing faintly in the dim light from the hallway. You did good, Lil, Silas said, his voice a low murmur. He sat on the edge of the mattress, his gaze tracing the elegant curve of one of my wings with open admiration. That took guts. I feel like I'm going to pass out, I whispered, clutching the duvet. My teeth were chattering. I'm empty. Ezra pushed off the door, his steps silent on the old carpet. He moved to the side of the bed opposite Silas, towering over me. We know, we can smell the deficit on you. His voice was a low rumble that I felt in my bones. I can't go out, I said, my own voice shaking. Not here, not tonight. I'm too tired to hunt. No bars, Ezra stated firmly. He reached out, his large, warm hand cupping my cheek. His calloused thumb brushed over my lower lip, which trembled under his touch. We filed the paperwork before we left Chicago. Section 4, Paragraph B, Emergency Sustenance Protocols during Field Operations. My eyes widened, my breath catching in my throat. You did. We weren't going to let you starve, Silas murmured, leaning closer. His hand slid up my leg, warm and heavy through the duvet, coming to rest possessively on my thigh. And frankly, the idea of you hunting in some Ohio dive bar while we wait in the car wasn't sitting right with us. Why? I breathed, the question barely a whisper. Because you're ours to protect, Ezra said simply, his slate-gray eyes intense. In every way, it wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact that resonated deep in my demonic core, a claim that my soul instinctively recognized. The hunger flared, sharp and demanding, but for the first time it was met with an offer of salvation, not just a transaction. Silas, I looked at him, my need a raw, open thing between us. He grinned, that lazy, wicked grin that made my toes curl. I thought you'd never ask. He leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't tentative, it was a collision of want and waiting. Tasted of spice and absolute control, and as his tongue swept into my mouth, I felt the first trickle of pure energy flow from him to me. It was intoxicating, a heady rush of concentrated desire that made me moan. Ezra didn't wait. He moved behind me, his solid chest pressing against my back, his body expertly avoiding my wings. His lips found the sensitive spot where my horn met my temple, and he nipped gently. Feed Lillian, he commanded, his voice vibrating through my skull. Take what you need from us. I let go of the last of my control. I turned into their touch, my hands tangling in Silas's hair as Ezra's arms wrapped around my waist, pulling me back against him. The duvet was kicked away, forgotten. You're beautiful, Silas whispered against my neck, his hands exploring the ridges of my spine, the sensitive base of my wings. Horns, tail, all of it. We've been dying to see you like this. I was afraid, I confessed, gasping as Ezra's hand slid up my shirt to cup my breast, his thumb stroking me into a sharp peak. Afraid you'd see me as a monster. We deal with monsters every day, Ezra growled into my ear, biting lightly at the junction of my neck and shoulder. You are not a monster, you are a miracle. The hunger roared and I drew from them. I pulled on their lust, their fierce protectiveness, their quiet adoration. It flooded my veins like liquid gold, chasing away the cold, chasing away the fear, filling every empty part of me. Silas moved over me, his weight pressing me into the mattress, while Ezra anchored me from behind. It was a tangle of limbs and wings and overwhelming heat. More, I begged, arching into them, finally free. As much as you want, Silas promised, his lips claiming mine again. We aren't going anywhere. And for the first time since my biology betrayed me, since the world became a terrifying place of hunger and secrets, I believed it. I wasn't just surviving anymore. Surrounded by them, claimed by them, I was home.